Cheating isn't something you plan for. It sneaks up on you, like a series of tiny decisions that feel harmless in the moment, but one day you wake up and realize you're in too deep. Looking back, it's hard to pinpoint where it all started, but I guess it began with the first lie, the one I told myself before I ever lied to her. I've been with Alina for 3 years. We met at a mutual friend's party. You know the kind: too much cheap wine, music loud enough to rattle your bones, and small talk that turns into deeper conversations as the night wears on. I remember seeing her across the room and thinking, she's out of my league. She had this effortless beauty about her. Her laugh was infectious, and she seemed to draw people in without even trying. Somehow, by the end of the night, we ended up sitting on a balcony, talking about our favorite books like we'd known each other for years. One thing led to another, and soon enough, we were inseparable. Alina was everything I thought I wanted. She was kind, intelligent, supportive, someone I could talk to for hours without getting bored. She had this grounded energy that made me feel like I was finally at peace, like I'd found the person who could make sense of the mess inside my head. We moved in together after just 8 months of dating. It seemed fast, but when you're in love, things like timing don't matter. For a while, everything was perfect. I'd come home from work and she'd be waiting with that same warm smile. We cooked together, traveled when we could afford it, and shared little rituals that made life feel special. Saturday morning coffee runs, late-night movie marathons. We rarely fought, and when we did, it was always over something small, like dishes or laundry. Our relationship felt stable, comfortable, but maybe that was the problem. Comfort has a way of numbing you. What felt exciting in the beginning eventually became routine. I started to miss the spark, the adrenaline rush of newness. I tried to ignore it at first, convincing myself that this was normal. Every relationship slows down eventually, right? But deep down, a part of me craved something different, something more. Then came Katya. Katya worked at the same company as me. I'd seen her around the office, but we never interacted much beyond the occasional good morning in the elevator. She worked in marketing, always busy with clients and projects, and had this confident, no-nonsense attitude that was both intimidating and intriguing. She wasn't traditionally beautiful like Alina, but there was something about her. Maybe it was the way she carried herself, with that quiet sense of purpose. Like she knew exactly who she was and didn't need anyone's approval. It started innocently enough: work-related conversations, lunch breaks shared at the same table in the office cafeteria. I didn't think much of it at first, but gradually I found myself looking forward to seeing her. She was funny in a dry, sarcastic way, and our banter became this secret language we shared. We'd exchange glances during meetings, small smiles that no one else seemed to notice. It was thrilling in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. One day, after a particularly stressful week at work, I found myself messaging her outside of office hours. Just a casual, "How's it going?" Nothing inappropriate, nothing I couldn't justify. She replied quickly, and we spent the next hour texting back and forth about everything and nothing. It felt good, easy. The next day, I saw her in the office, and something shifted. There was an unspoken understanding between us now. Our conversations grew more personal. We talked about our dreams, our frustrations, our lives outside of work. I didn't tell Alina about these talks, but I didn't feel guilty either. I convinced myself that it was harmless. We were just friends, right? But then came the lie. It was a Friday night, and Alina had plans to meet up with some old friends from university. She asked if I wanted to join her, but I said I was too tired from work. That was the first lie I told her. In reality, I had plans with Katya. Nothing serious, just a drink after work to blow off some steam. I told myself there was no harm in it. It wasn't a date. We were just co-workers, grabbing a drink, like we'd done many times before. But as I sat across from Katya in that dimly lit bar, sipping my beer, I couldn't ignore the feeling in my chest. It was excitement, that rush I'd been missing for so long. We talked for hours, and by the time I checked my phone, it was past midnight. I had 6 missed calls from Alina. I made up some excuse when I got home, told her my phone had died and that I'd fallen asleep early. She didn't question it, just smiled and kissed me goodnight. I remember lying there, staring at the ceiling, feeling a knot of guilt twist in my stomach. But I told myself it was nothing. One little lie wasn't going to hurt anyone. Except it wasn't just one lie. The drinks with Katya became a regular thing, Once a week turned into twice a week. Then we started texting more often, late into the night when Alina was asleep next to me. I told myself it was still innocent, that I wasn't crossing any lines. But deep down, I knew I was on dangerous ground. The thing about cheating is that it doesn't happen all at once. It's a slow unraveling, a series of tiny decisions that pull you further and further away from the person you're supposed to be loyal to. And by the time you realize what's happening, it's already too late. I didn't want to admit it to myself, but I was already falling for Katya. The more time I spent with her, the more I found myself comparing her to Alina. Katya was spontaneous, unpredictable in a way that made me feel alive. With her, I wasn't just another guy in a long-term relationship. I was someone exciting, someone new. She made me feel like the version of myself I'd forgotten about, the one who took risks, who chased after what he wanted without thinking about the consequences. And so, I kept lying. The lies got easier after that first one. Each time I made an excuse, each time I ignored Alina's calls or stayed out later than I should, the guilt became quieter. It didn't disappear completely. It was always there, lurking in the back of my mind like a shadow, but it got easier to ignore. I learned to compartmentalize, to keep my life with Katya and my life with Alina in separate boxes that never touched. In my head, I wasn't a cheater. I was just someone who needed a break from routine, from the predictable patterns my life had fallen into. That's the thing with justifications. They become a kind of armor, protecting you from the reality of what you're doing. I told myself I wasn't really hurting anyone. I wasn't sleeping with Katya after all. We were just spending time together. And what was wrong with that? I convinced myself that I deserved a little excitement, that after 3 years with Alina, it was normal to feel restless. But deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. I just didn't want to face it. The shift from just friends to something more happened slowly, almost imperceptibly. There wasn't one defining moment when everything changed, no sudden declaration of feelings. It was more like a series of small steps, one blurred line after another, until the line didn't exist anymore. It started with the texts. At first, they were innocent enough. Funny memes, complaints about work, inside jokes that had grown between us. But soon the messages became more personal, more intimate. We started sharing things we hadn't before. Our fears, our doubts, the things that kept us up at night. It was easy to be vulnerable with Katya in a way that I hadn't been with Alina in a long time. With Alina, things felt safe, predictable. With Katya, there was always an edge, a sense of danger that kept me on my toes. Then came the physical contact. Again, it wasn't anything dramatic. Just a hand brushing against mine during a conversation, a hug that lasted a few seconds too long. But those little moments carried weight. Every time our hands touched, every time I felt her body close to mine, there was a spark, a reminder that I was playing with fire. And yet I couldn't stop myself. The turning point came one evening after work. Katya and I had gone for our usual drink at the bar down the street, and as we were leaving, it started to rain. Hard, the kind of rain that drenches you in seconds. We ran for cover under the awning of a nearby shop, laughing at the sudden downpour. Our faces were close, her breath visible in the cool evening air. And without thinking, I reached out and tucked a strand of wet hair behind her ear. It was such a small gesture, but the moment I did it, I knew I'd crossed a line. Katya froze, her eyes locking with mine, and for a second I thought she was going to pull away. But she didn't. Instead, she stepped closer. So close I could feel the heat from her body mixing with the cold of the rain. My heart was racing, pounding in my chest so hard I thought she might hear it. And then, without saying a word, she leaned in and kissed me. I should have stopped it right there. I should have pulled away, told her it was a mistake, that I couldn't do this. But I didn't. I kissed her back, and in that moment, everything else melted away. Alina, my guilt, the consequences of what I was doing. It was just me and Katya, standing in the rain, caught in a moment that felt both inevitable and surreal. The kiss didn't last long, but when we finally pulled apart, everything had changed. We stood there in silence for a few seconds, both of us breathing hard, both of us knowing there was no going back. Katya was the first to speak. "We shouldn't have done that," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But there was no regret in her eyes. If anything, she looked excited, like she was waiting for me to make the next move. I didn't know what to say. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Guilt, desire, confusion. I knew I should apologize, should tell her it was a mistake, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I just nodded, muttering something about needing to get home. I left her there, standing under the awning as the rain poured down, and walked back to my car in a daze. My clothes were soaked, but I barely felt the cold. All I could think about was the kiss, the way her lips had felt against mine, the way I'd wanted more. When I got home, Alina was already asleep. She had left a note on the kitchen counter. "Missed you. Hope you had a good night. Let's have breakfast tomorrow." It was a simple, sweet gesture, the kind of thing she always did when I worked late. I stared at the note for a long time, feeling a wave of guilt crash over me. I told myself that what had happened with Katya was a one-time thing, that I would end it before it went any further. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. The kiss had awakened something in me, something I hadn't felt in a long time. And now that I'd tasted it, I wasn't sure I could stop. The next few days were a blur. I avoided Katya at work, keeping our interactions strictly professional. But the tension between us was palpable. Every time we were in the same room, I could feel her eyes on me, could sense the unspoken question hanging in the air. What happens now? It didn't take long for us to fall back into old patterns. A week after the kiss, we went out for drinks again. This time, there was no hesitation, no pretense. We both knew what we were doing. We kissed again, and this time, it didn't stop there. We went back to her place, and I slept with her. I wish I could say that I felt guilty afterward, that I realized what I was doing and ended things before they got any worse. But the truth is, I didn't. I felt exhilarated, like I'd rediscovered a part of myself that had been dormant for too long. Katya made me feel alive in a way that I hadn't felt in years, and I wasn't ready to give that up. Of course, I still loved Alina, or at least I told myself I did. But love had become something different, less about passion and more about responsibility. I didn't want to hurt her. I didn't want to end our relationship, but I also didn't want to stop seeing Katya. And so, I continued living a double life. At home, I was the same boyfriend I'd always been, attentive, supportive, loving. But with Katya, I was someone else, someone freer, more spontaneous, more reckless. I told myself I could keep the two worlds separate, that as long as Alina didn't find out, no one would get hurt. But deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. I kept telling myself that I could manage it, that I could juggle two lives without either of them falling apart. But living with a secret like that is exhausting in ways I never expected. The constant lying, the mental gymnastics to keep my story straight, the endless pretending, it wore me down, little by little, until I started to lose track of who I really was. The worst part was, Alina didn't suspect a thing. She trusted me completely, and why wouldn't she? I'd never given her a reason not to. I still came home every night, still sat with her on the couch and watched our favorite shows, still made plans for the future. On the surface, nothing had changed, but inside I was unraveling. Every time I looked at her, I felt this gnawing guilt, this heavy weight in my chest that made it hard to breathe. I'd catch her smiling at me, that same warm, trusting smile she'd always had, and I'd feel like the worst person in the world. But even that guilt wasn't enough to make me stop. The truth was, I didn't want to stop. I didn't want to give up Katya. My relationship with Katya had become an escape. With her, I didn't have to think about the lies or the guilt. I didn't have to be the responsible boyfriend, the dependable partner. I could be selfish, reckless, free. It was intoxicating. The more time I spent with her, the more I wanted. What had started as a fling, a brief distraction, was turning into something I couldn't control. I told myself I was in love with both of them, but that was just another lie. It wasn't love, not really. It was lust, desire, the thrill of doing something I knew I wasn't supposed to. But there was something deeper too. Something about Katya that pulled me in, made me feel understood in a way that Alina didn't anymore. It wasn't that Alina and I had grown distant. If anything, we were closer than ever. We still talked every night, still shared our hopes and worries. But those conversations had become routine, part of the daily rhythm we'd fallen into. With Katya, everything felt new. There were no routines, no expectations. Every moment with her was unpredictable, and I craved that unpredictability like a drug. As the weeks turned into months, my two worlds started to bleed into each other. I found myself checking my phone constantly, waiting for messages from Katya even when I was sitting next to Alina. I started making excuses to stay out later, to avoid weekends where I knew I'd have to spend too much time with Alina. She noticed, of course. She wasn't stupid. "Is everything okay?" she asked me one evening, her eyes searching mine for an answer I didn't want to give. "Yeah, of course," I lied. "Just busy with work. You know how it is." She nodded, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. That was the thing about Alina. She always knew when something was off, but she trusted me enough not to push, and I took advantage of that trust, over and over again. Things with Katya were getting more complicated too. What had started as casual drinks and late-night texts had evolved into something deeper. We were spending more time together, sneaking around like teenagers, hiding our relationship from everyone at work. At first it was fun, the secrecy, the stolen moments. But soon it became a source of stress. Every time we were together, I felt like we were on the verge of being caught. There were close calls. Once we ran into a colleague at the bar we frequented. Another time, Katya accidentally left her scarf in my car, and I had to come up with a quick excuse when Alina found it. Each time, my heart would race, adrenaline pumping as I scrambled to cover my tracks. The worst was the guilt. It started to haunt me in ways I hadn't expected. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, my mind racing with thoughts of Alina finding out. I'd picture her face, the look of betrayal when she realized what I'd done. The thought of hurting her was unbearable, and yet I couldn't bring myself to stop. Katya, on the other hand, was growing impatient. She never said it outright, but I could tell she wanted more. She wanted me to leave Alina, to be with her for real. We hadn't talked about it, not directly, but it hung in the air between us like a question that neither of us was brave enough to ask. One night, after we'd been together, she brought it up. "Where do you see this going?" she asked, her voice soft but insistent. I froze, unsure of how to respond. I hadn't thought that far ahead. I'd been living in the moment, enjoying the thrill of what we had, without considering the future. But now that she'd asked, I realized I didn't have an answer. "I don't know," I admitted, staring at the ceiling. "I haven't really thought about it." She turned to face me, her expression unreadable. "You're still with her," she said, and it wasn't a question. I nodded, feeling a knot form in my stomach. "Yeah." She didn't say anything for a long time. We just lay there in silence, the weight of her unspoken expectations pressing down on me. "I can't do this forever, you know," she said finally, her voice tinged with sadness. "I don't want to be the other woman." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I hadn't thought of her like that, not as the other woman, not in those terms. But that's exactly what she was. That's exactly what I'd made her. "I know," I said quietly. "I don't want you to be." "So what happens now?" she asked, her eyes searching mine. I didn't have an answer. I couldn't imagine a world without Katya, but I couldn't bear the thought of leaving Alina either. I was trapped, caught between two lives that couldn't coexist. "I don't know," I whispered, feeling the weight of my indecision settle over me like a heavy blanket. Katya didn't push me after that. She just nodded, as if she understood, but I could see the disappointment in her eyes. She wanted more, and I knew I couldn't give it to her, not without destroying everything else in my life. I told myself I'd figure it out eventually, that I'd make a decision when the time was right. But the truth was, I was scared. Scared of losing Alina, scared of losing Katya, scared of what would happen if I had to choose. And so I did nothing. I let things continue the way they were, lying to both of them, lying to myself, pretending that I could keep this delicate balance forever. But deep down, I knew the truth. Sooner or later, something would break. And when it did, everything would come crashing down around me. The unraveling had already begun. By now, the cracks were starting to show, even if I wasn't ready to admit it. It was only a matter of time before something gave way, and the carefully constructed life I'd built would fall apart. But even knowing that, I couldn't bring myself to stop. The thrill, the excitement, it was all too intoxicating. And as I lay there next to Katya, her body pressed against mine, I knew that I was standing at the edge of a cliff. One wrong move, and I'd lose everything. But instead of stepping back, I closed my eyes and let myself fall deeper. Each day felt like a ticking clock, and yet I refused to face the inevitable. But the longer I waited, the heavier the secret became, until eventually it would crush me. The balancing act couldn't last forever. In the back of my mind, I always knew that. But there was something intoxicating about it. The danger, the secrecy, the thrill of being desired by two women. It was like living in two different worlds, and I kept telling myself I could keep them both spinning, indefinitely. But that's the thing about lies. They're fragile. They pile up until eventually they collapse under their own weight, and when they do, they take everything down with them. It was a Saturday, just an ordinary weekend morning. Alina and I had been planning to spend the day together, something we hadn't done in a while. I knew she could feel the distance growing between us, even if she couldn't quite put her finger on why. So I tried harder that morning, woke up early, made her breakfast, played the part of the attentive boyfriend. But even as I sat across from her at the kitchen table, chatting about mundane things, I couldn't stop thinking about Katya. We hadn't seen each other for a few days. After our last conversation, things had been tense. She'd been distant, frustrated, and I couldn't blame her. She was tired of waiting for me to make a choice I wasn't ready to make. Still, I hadn't been able to stop myself from texting her. I needed the connection, needed to know that she was still there. And that's when everything unraveled. Alina was in the shower when my phone buzzed. I was standing in the kitchen, cleaning up the dishes, when I saw Katya's name light up the screen. My stomach clenched, a mixture of excitement and guilt, like it always did when I heard from her. But this time, it wasn't a flirty text or a secret plan to meet up. It was just one line. "We need to talk. I can't do this anymore." I stared at the message, my heart pounding in my chest. It felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. Katya had never been this direct before. She was always patient, always waiting in the wings, hoping I'd make a decision. But now she was giving me an ultimatum. I didn't have time to respond before I heard the shower turn off. Panic set in. I quickly shoved my phone into my pocket, trying to act normal as Alina walked into the room, towel drying her hair, smiling at me. But I couldn't focus. The weight of Katya's message hung over me like a cloud, suffocating me. I needed to figure out what to do. I needed to think. But how could I think when Alina was right here, expecting me to be present, to be the person she thought I was? We spent the day together, but my mind was elsewhere. I tried to act like nothing was wrong, but I could feel the tension building. Every time my phone buzzed in my pocket, I jumped, terrified that it was another message from Katya. Alina noticed, of course. She wasn't stupid. She could sense that something was off, even if she didn't know what. By the time evening came, I was a wreck. I hadn't responded to Katya's message, hadn't figured out what to do. The walls were closing in on me, and I felt like I was suffocating under the weight of my own lies. It all came to a head that night. We were sitting on the couch, watching a movie. Alina was curled up next to me, her head resting on my shoulder, her fingers intertwined with mine. I should have felt content, but instead all I could think about was Katya, her message, her ultimatum, the fact that I was on the verge of losing her. My phone buzzed again. I tried to ignore it, but Alina noticed. She glanced at me, her brows furrowing. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice soft but concerned. "Yeah," I said too quickly, my voice tight. "Just work stuff." She gave me a skeptical look but didn't push it. She trusted me after all. She had no reason not to, but that trust was about to shatter. A few minutes later, I got up to go to the bathroom. My phone clutched tightly in my hand. I needed to check the message. I needed to know if Katya had sent something else. But I hadn't been careful enough. As I was about to open the bathroom door, I heard Alina's voice behind me. "Who's Katya?" I froze. For a split second, I considered lying, coming up with some excuse, some half-truth that would explain everything away. But when I turned around and saw the look on her face, saw the hurt, the suspicion, the fear, I knew I couldn't lie anymore. I was caught. There was no way out. She's just someone from work," I stammered, trying to sound casual, but my voice betrayed me. Alina's eyes narrowed. "Someone from work who's texting you late at night? Who's making you act like this?" Her voice was rising now, a mixture of anger and panic. I opened my mouth to respond, but the words wouldn't come. I felt like I was drowning, choking on my own lies. Alina stood there, waiting for me to say something, anything that would make sense of what she was seeing. But I had nothing. No more lies, no more excuses. The truth was too big, too ugly to hide anymore. Finally, I spoke. It's not what you think, I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew how hollow they sounded, because it was exactly what she thought. Maybe worse. Alina's face crumpled. She didn't need me to spell it out. She could see it in my eyes, hear it in my voice. The trust we'd built over the last 3 years was crumbling, right in front of her, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. "How long?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I couldn't lie anymore. "A few months." She didn't say anything for a long time, just stood there, staring at me like I was a stranger, like the person she thought she knew had disappeared. And in a way, I had. The person she'd loved, the person she'd trusted, was gone, replaced by someone else. Someone who had betrayed her in the worst way possible. "I'm sorry," I whispered, but the words felt empty. What was I sorry for? For lying? For cheating? For getting caught? Alina didn't respond. She just turned and walked out of the room, leaving me standing there in the hallway, my phone still clutched in my hand. Katya's unanswered message glowing on the screen. The days that followed were a blur of silence and tension. Alina didn't leave, not right away. She stayed in the apartment, but we barely spoke. The atmosphere was thick with unspoken words, with the hurt that hung between us like a fog. I tried to talk to her, to explain, to apologize, but nothing I said made any difference. The damage was done. She wasn't angry, not in the way I'd expected. She didn't yell, didn't throw things, didn't demand answers. Instead, she was quiet, almost eerily calm, like the reality of what had happened was too much for her to process. She moved through the apartment like a ghost, barely acknowledging my presence, lost in her own world of pain. I thought about leaving. I thought about going to Katya, about starting over with her. But the thought of abandoning Alina, of walking away from everything we'd built together, felt like too much. I couldn't do it. Not yet. Katya, on the other hand, was growing impatient. I hadn't spoken to her since that night. I didn't know what to say. I was trapped between the life I had with Alina and the life I could have with Katya, and I didn't know how to choose. But the choice was taken out of my hands. A week after everything came crashing down, Alina came home from work and told me she was leaving. "I can't do this anymore," she said, her voice steady, but her eyes red and swollen from crying. I deserve better than this. I wanted to argue, to beg her to stay, but I couldn't. She was right. She did deserve better. So I let her go. She packed her things in silence, and by the end of the night, she was gone. Just like that, 3 years of my life disappeared out the door, leaving me alone in the apartment we'd shared, surrounded by the ghost of everything we'd built together. And that's when it hit me. The full weight of what I'd done, of the choices I'd made, of the lies I'd told. I'd destroyed the one good thing in my life. And for what? For the thrill of something new? For the excitement of someone else's attention? I didn't sleep that night. I just sat on the couch, staring at the empty space where Alina's things had been, feeling the crushing weight of my own regret. In the days that followed, I tried to pick up the pieces. I reached out to Katya, hoping that maybe with Alina gone, I could salvage something from the wreckage of my life. But when I called her, she didn't answer. I texted her, but the messages went unread. She'd made her decision too. I'd lost her, just like I'd lost Alina. I was alone, completely, utterly alone. For a while, I tried to tell myself that this was for the best, that maybe now I could start fresh, rebuild my life without the weight of the lies I'd been carrying. But the truth was, I didn't know how to move forward. I didn't know how to live with the knowledge that I'd hurt 2 people I cared about, that I'd ruined everything because I couldn't make a choice. Weeks passed, and the silence in the apartment became unbearable. I quit my job, unable to face the gossip, the whispers I knew were circulating. Katya had moved on, and so had Alina. I was the one left behind, stuck in the mess I'd made. One night, months after everything had fallen apart, I found myself scrolling through old photos of Alina and me, photos from trips we'd taken, from parties, from quiet moments at home. I saw the way she'd looked at me, the trust in her eyes, the love she'd so freely given, and I realized with a clarity that came too late that I'd never really understood what I had until it was gone. I'd thought I could have it all. Katya, Alina, the thrill of something new, and the comfort of something familiar. But in the end, I'd lost everything. The weight of my choices settled over me like a heavy fog, and for the first time in months, I allowed myself to feel the full extent of my regret. I'd destroyed two lives, Alina's and my own. And now I had to live with that. I never saw either of them again. Alina moved away, and Katya, well, she became just another name in my phone. Another memory of a life I could have had, but threw away. Looking back, I wish I could say I learned something, that I became a better person, that I found a way to move on. But the truth is, some mistakes follow you forever. Some choices can't be undone. And some people, no matter how much you love them, are lost to you forever. This is the story of how I lost everything. And the saddest part, I have no one to blame but myself.